M. Bison, the psycho power-wielding despotic villain who holds a place in history as Street Fighter's most iconic villain. Many other baddies from this decades-old franchise, though, are not even close to as celebrated, and some have been frankly disappointing. None fit such a description better than the fighter we are spotlighting today, a combatant who at one point was thought to be so badass, fans were desperate to see how his story would unfold. Perhaps no Street Fighter character has been more of a letdown than this one, so without further ado, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Pat here. This is the story of Necalli, Street Fighter's worst ever villain. Yeah. Footage of Street Fighter V would surface in December of 2014, but it would not be until 8 months later, in July of 2015, that fans would finally get to see a trailer showcasing the brand new fighter who would be debuting in the game, resulting in a great deal of excitement. But rather than simply talking about this, you may as well take a look for yourself, so you can see why people are looking forward to this new character.
Necalli wins.
Just wow. No wonder gamers were so impressed with the look of this fighter. Necalli in combat looked like an absolute savage, showing off extreme aggression in combat and throwing Ken around like a ragdoll. What made Necalli seem all the more important was the massive V imprinted on his terrifying face, symbolising that he would be a significant part of the so-called 5th entry in the Street Fighter series. Something fans were well aware of would be the introduction of V-triggers in Street Fighter V. The trailer would showcase that when Necalli engages his V-trigger, his hair would go wild, glowing red, performing an intimidating Super Saiyan-like transformation. This unfriendly looking character led many Street Fighter fans to make instant comparisons to Dragon Ball Z's Broly, with speculation quickly running wild that this badass looking character would be the final boss of Street Fighter V. To say that Necalli looked like the next big thing for the franchise would be an understatement. So with all this initial hype around him, what would go wrong for this frightening, formidable fighter? Let us try and find out by analysing this character's entire history. Street Fighter V early design concept showed that throughout development many ideas were exchanged. For example, Necalli's final design shares a lot of similarities with one of the first round drafts of Street Fighter V's Akuma. The Shanlu Research Institute states that Capcom dropped this design as it was too similar to a certain other character, but they do not specify how far along Necalli's design was at this point. Video Game Facts also shows a time when Necalli resembled a Sasquatch, with event hubs showing off later designs on their site of Necalli looking even more sinister than with his final design. Eventually Capcom would choose a final look for this mysterious combatant, but really, who even is Necalli, and why does he look the way he does? According to Street Fighter lore, Necalli is said to be an ancient Aztec warrior who searches for the souls of powerful fighters to devour, and in many cases devouring the fighters themselves too. To fit this image, Necalli's design is inspired by Aztec mythology, sharing visual similarities with the Aztec god of the sun, war and human sacrifice, Huitzilopochtli, or at least how he is represented in modern media. The sun god connection can be further seen in Necalli's wild-haired, unrestrained form when he radiates brightly like the sun itself. Speaking of the sun, the irises of his eyes glow a fiery yellow, and when paired with his ancient Aztec-inspired clothing, it really does give this fighter a godlike aura. In combat, Necalli comes across more vicious, unrelenting and feral than any other Street Fighter character. Essentially think Blanka, but if Blanka was more wild, malicious and unstable and came across psychopathic. The game refers to Necalli as having a violent style, taking advantage of physique, with him utilising a combination of feral brawling and wrestling. Amongst his arsenal of moves, Necalli can perform claw attacks, diving kicks and ground slams. Some of these include literally slamming opponents' faces into the floor. As stated earlier, Necalli's form changes when his V-trigger is used. Known as the Torrent of Power, his hair flows wildly and he gains a red aura, with him beginning to rely even more on brute force. With vicious moves like the Valiant Rebellion Stomp and his Disc's Guidance, which can be used to go right through projectiles, Necalli in combat can be quite frankly terrifying. So with a great design and brutal moveset, what made the public tire so quickly of this fighter? Well, it is quite simple. Within Street Fighter V's story, Capcom would write Necalli as one of the biggest losers and chumps in the franchise's history. Obviously, to make a character more of a believable threat, who is said to devour souls, you have to show him, well, devouring souls. Sadly though, the bare bones launch of Street Fighter V meant at first we never even had the opportunity to see any cinematic cutscenes of this character in action. Instead, we could only learn about him through the game's individual character stories, which consisted of hand-drawn stills. Playing as Necalli, rather than getting to see him devour the soul of a famous fighter from the franchise, instead we get taken back to Aztec times, where we are familiarised with a warrior prophet, who none of us had ever heard of, who was creatively named the Warrior Prophet. At an ancient altar, the Warrior Prophet warns that once every few hundred years, stars herald the hour of battle, and Necalli walks this plane. This Necalli wields an unearthly power and can devour the souls of strong warriors. When the next hour of battle comes, many warriors will nourish him to his satiety. The first of these warriors agonises to proceed on his path. Inside him, the red power burns at his soul. Now, in somewhat of a cop-out, Necalli's story is played through a vision that this warrior prophet sees taking place in the distant future, rather than taking place in real time. During the hour of battle, the warrior prophet foresees Necalli trying to devour the souls of Ryu, Dalsim and M. Bison, with the warrior prophet emphasising that Necalli only comes to devour the souls of the strongest fighters. In his short playthrough, it ends with Necalli devouring the warrior prophet himself, with the prophet taking solace in the fact that he got to witness the might of Necalli himself, due to the fact he must be strong. This indicates that the vision he saw cannot be accurate, as Necalli changes form to the recognisable one we mentioned earlier in this video, only after consuming the warrior prophet. Therefore, if and when Necalli was to re-emerge in the future, he would not look the same as in the prophet's vision. So that was our story introduction to the character, getting to see him devour a character who was created by Capcom specifically for that purpose, along with getting to see scenes that could in theory see him devouring other fighters in the franchise too. But sadly, it would be his appearance in Street Fighter V's main big cinematic story, known as a Shadow Falls, where the illusion around Necalli being a godlike power would well and truly be shattered. So let's break down this once intimidated entity's embarrassing fall from grace, where we would get to see what happened when this so-called prophecy actually played out. A Shadow Falls was an interesting concept, as we would get to see the cast of Street Fighter V all featured alongside one another in one huge cinematic story, the first for any Street Fighter game, technically allowing for more character depth to be added to each fighter than with any other game previously. Sadly, this mode is often criticised for being goofy and in some cases did more damage to certain characters than it appears to have helped them, with Necalli in my opinion becoming the biggest victim of all, with it quickly becoming clear that Capcom had no clue what to do with their so-called god character. Near the beginning of the story, after centuries in hibernation, Necalli is awoken due to Shenlu's black moons blotting out the sun. Satellites engineered so that M. Bison can draw more psycho energy, becoming more powerful than ever before. Necalli, now existing in the present, just like in the prophecy, wants to devour the most powerful souls on Earth, so obviously sets his sights on Ryu to satiate his appetite. He manages to encounter Ryu in an alley, even managing to somewhat overpower him once in his Super Saiyan-like transformed state. But what Necalli was not bargaining for was that when Ryu starts losing control, he too can tap into a transformed state, using the Satsui no Hado, the same dark energy utilised by Akuma. Dhalsim witnesses the fight between these two supernatural beings and manages to snap Ryu back to normal, and being no match for the two of them, Necalli reveals he was awakened by the Black Moons before vanishing back into the darkness. Dhalsim explains to Ryu what Necalli is, with his appearance symbolising the world now being in crisis. So, unable to devour Ryu or Dhalsim, Necalli's next sets his sights on Charlie Nash. Having the ability to cross between metaphysical planes of existence, he appears in one of Charlie's dreams, taking the form of a sheep before reverting to his normal state. He tries to devour Charlie, however a butterfly unexpectedly glows a bright white light, waking Charlie from his nightmare. After failing his 2 previous attempts at devouring souls, you would think that 3 times would be a charm. Maybe M. Bison at the Shadaloo base would be easy pickings. But nope, Necalli fights M. Bison, but empowered by psycho energy that is being pumped into him via the Black Moons, Necalli is no match for him whatsoever. Instead, Necalli staggers from the supercharged Bison attacks, allowing for Bison's henchman Fang to step in, poisoning Necalli for good measure, temporarily managing to knock the Aztec demigod out. Outmatched once again, Necalli flees from the scene, but these were not Necalli's only Shadow Falls failures, as there is also a scene where he pursues Charlie and Rashid, but they manage to escape to Karin's helicopter. Not being one to give up easily, he does re-emerge at Karin's estate, giving him another shot at Ryu. He brutally attacks the franchise's biggest star, but Ryu manages to dodge Necalli's assault. Ryu manages to tap into a pure light energy form known as the Power of Nothingness, which prevents Necalli from being able to devour his soul. Perplexed by this, Necalli is confused and questions what just happened. Dhalsim teleports behind him and tells him he must go, as Ryu's soul is no longer his to devour. Necalli makes a shocked clickbait face before dissipating into goo, not to be seen again in the main story. The confrontation allows Ryu to overcome the Dark Shadow, tap into the Power of Nothingness, then in the conclusion of the story use the same new ability to defeat M. Bison. So therefore, in A Shadow Falls, we do not get to see Necalli devour any souls like in the prophecy whatsoever, and instead we simply saw him used as a plot device to make both M. Bison and Ryu look a bit more powerful. In their fights with Necalli, both characters showcase their newfound powers and defeat him. So therefore, Necalli went from looking like a Super Saiyan God to looking like a chump in one gameplay mode. But with new characters being added to the game via DLC, maybe these additional characters' prologues could spotlight Necalli in a more terrifying light. Well, one would think that's what Capcom would do, but in reality, they would just make him look even more like an idiot. Set after the events of A Shadow Falls, Necalli would go after one of the most delicious souls of all, wanting to devour Akuma within his story. Demigod versus the master of the Satsui no Hado looks great on paper. In the story, Akuma wants to defeat Necalli to take his place in the heavens, with Necalli retorting that he is unworthy. In their fight, Necalli looks like a loser again, being no match for the superhuman. After losing in a twist of fate, he manages to devour Akuma anyway, through a sneak attack. But through his immense power, Akuma escapes anyway, through Necalli's stomach, seemingly destroying him in the process. While this scene could very well have marked the end for this overhyped fighter, he also shows up in Balrog's story during a scene where Balrog is meeting Urien. Illuminati member Urien is familiar with Necalli and theorizes he is there to eat their souls. Urien states he wants to gauge Balrog's strength in a match with Necalli. Ruining a hefty payday, Balrog is enraged by Necalli, going as far as to refer to him as a mudman.
Ah, that's racist.
The Mike Tyson ripoff manages to show everyone that he really is one of the most dangerous men in the world, as this boxer, with no superpowers to call his own, defeats a demigod, leading him to transform into clay and disappearing. So all in all, I think Necalli was a great looking character with a brutal moveset to back up his terrifying look. But sadly, every element of the Street Fighter V story would kill off any intimidating aura this demigod previously had. All of this makes me wonder if the intention always was to use him as a plot device, to make M. Bison and Ryu look more powerful, or whether at some point Capcom had greater ambitions for him. Maybe something involving him and Rashid, a character who according to Capcom was the main protagonist in Street Fighter V. A claim that if you actually play the game is laughable, but that's a subject for an episode coming soon. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see me try and unravel that hot mess of a bizarre story. Do you think Necalli was a botched character, or were our expectations for him simply too high? Let me know in the comment section. Cheerio!